Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talk about software and the apocalypse with Ian Reynolds. Ian is a partner and chief solutions architect for ZibTech, a software development consultancy focused on helping businesses build custom software. Ian has spent the better part of his career in consulting and has served in diverse industries such as finance, oil and gas, retail power, field services, midstream energy, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, transactional finance, mergers and acquisitions, reconstruction, e-commerce, retail, and software development. And now, to add to that extensive list, he can also add that he's been a guest on The Cynical Developer. So welcome to the show, Ian.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking some time out. I know that we're all under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress at the moment. So taking a short break away from it to think about other things is always good. Although maybe the topic for today's show doesn't take us too far away from reality. So yesterday I watched a film from 2011, and I really don't think I should have watched it. It's called Contagion. And it's a blow-by-blow of exactly what's happening in the world now, but filmed several years ago. It was quite scary, and
who's the main actor for that? Who's the
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. Okay.
Yeah. Matt Damon.
I watched a really bad Dustin Hoffman film at somebody's recommendation, and it was terrible. I think it was done probably early 90s, and just probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So
yeah. There is another one. It's got a similar name, and I've heard really bad reviews about it. So it could well have been that one. Contagion was very scary in the fact that I think if you'd watched it maybe last year or even back in 2011, you would have gone, yeah, it's a bit unbelievable, that really. But it was scary how accurate it actually was, and how unprepared for disaster people and businesses really were and are. So we're here to talk about that sort of situation where things go awry a little bit for the world and mainly for businesses, and what that means for us as developers. Now, we often talk about disaster recovery, and we normally think about disaster recovery that if there was a natural disaster such as a fire or an earthquake or an airplane fell out of the sky and squashed your office, that you can get your business back up and running. But could you talk a little bit about maybe what disaster recovery is?
Sure. So in the context of the software and sort of software services realm, disaster recovery is by definition the process of getting back to normalcy, getting back to a production-ready state that allows you to serve your clients or meet your end users' needs really without hiccup. So it's getting back as quickly as possible without having any sort of data integrity or quality issues, sort of with that end product. It's a plan that you really kind of have to put in place and hopefully never use. It's something that is a series of steps, typically, that gets you from sort of catastrophic failure or just some material event that causes you to otherwise basically switch up your, let's say, processes, personnel, hosting, whatever, and get back online and get back to business as quickly as possible. So there's procedural components to that are sort of process mandated. Like, this person is in charge; they need to be able to access these files and do X, Y, Z. Right? That needs to be defined and who those personnel are. But over and above that, you also have to have a physical infrastructure component. Right? Here is a backup component that I have. Here's a backup of my database, or here's a backup set of physical hardware or cloud hardware that I can use to redeploy my solution. So having a defined plan that you can follow, potentially deviate from a little bit if you need to, but execute very quickly and decisively when something or some negative event occurs.
Sure. So it's a quick fire plan to get you back to business as usual, or as close to business as usual as possible in the shortest amount of time.
Absolutely.
And I think from what you were saying there, it doesn't just necessarily mean getting up servers back up and running and stuff that's hosted online, but that could actually be physical locations where staff could attend and do their day-to-day job.
Correct. Yeah. So an example of something we did or had to do very recently is, we have a couple hundred people on staff, and we needed them all to go remote. Now, thankfully, everybody's got a laptop, and everybody was already sort of had the option or need to sort of periodically get on in a remote fashion. What we wanted to do, though, is we had some people who didn't necessarily have the most stable internet connections. So we did a sort of internal poll before we had to take this action of who didn't have a stable or consistent internet access, and we just acquired internet dongles for those people ahead of any event or change of sort of location or one of these things. So we were sort of able to preempt these things, but we had the plan to go acquire these things and the contract to go acquire these wireless devices well in advance. And that was our disaster recovery plan, and really simply allowed management to just say, well, here's time to take this piece of paper out, follow the directions, and go from there.
Yeah, it's quite a big undertaking, I think, for some businesses to take that step into having not purple at all, having people working remote. I know of quite a few, at least local businesses to me, that maybe as early as the end of last year would not have been able to take their staff and have them working remote. It just wouldn't have been possible. I think it would have cost them their business. But somebody somewhere had the epiphany, a bit of foresight to start putting in place the ways and means to start remote working earlier in the year. And I think that's helped a lot of businesses here. But to you, what is remote working? Is it as simple as working from home?
No, I don't think it is, because the process is different. And let me explain that. So remote working is going to increasingly become the norm, because the world is flat, right? You can order steel from India on your phone, and you could be in the US or you could be in South America, right? So fundamentally, the internet has changed things. It's going to continue to change industries. We already know that's coming with retail, sort of moving towards an increased sort of hybrid model. It's changing distribution networks, et cetera. So working remote has to be more than just having access to the internet, being able to jump on a phone call or crank out some work from your laptop or desktop at home. Why do I say that it has to be more? Well, if you look at the work that's put out by some of these major engineering companies, let's say Google, right? There's a book called How Google Works. And one of the things they talk about is having people co-located in a way where they would basically rub elbows, share ideas, be kind of crammed together in a way that they otherwise wouldn't, right? Society doesn't, you're otherwise spending most of your time sort of, at home, by yourself or with your family. And by forcing people to be together in the same location, you're actually creating a friction of ideas that otherwise wouldn't occur. And that, as a result of having people co-located, is something that doesn't sort of spontaneously occur. It's something that actually businesses created. So working remote is a process of facilitating communication that probably wouldn't otherwise happen, just like what would happen in the office or workspace.
Sure. Yeah, it's something that I've done quite a bit of. I've done many roles that were 100% working remote, because I'm currently working with a client who has not done a lot of remote working, it seems that there is a lot of meetings going on, a lot of keeping tabs on people, making sure that everyone's all right, which it's all a part of the culture of making sure that everybody is okay, especially with the situation as it currently is. But as somebody who has done their fair share of remote working before, I find it quite difficult and quite frustrating to be in and out of these meetings that I would normally not be in, not be involved with. I probably had more meetings in the last 2 weeks than I've had maybe in the last 6 months of working with this client, just because of now working remote. And I think on that similar note, that working remote is it's not for everybody. It is quite hard. And for many years, I had friends tell me, "Oh, you're so lucky to be able to work from home. It must be great." Because I talked about, there was some companies I've worked for that they didn't need me 100% of the time. I didn't have any set hours, even as a permanent member of staff. So I would maybe log on early, do 4 or 5 hours. It'd get to lunchtime. I'd go and take lunch break, go fishing for a couple of hours in the afternoon, and chill out. And I'd come back, have my evening meal, and then do another few hours. And as long as I got the projects done, that was all okay. And they saw that and they thought, "Oh, fantastic! You know, that's living the dream." And I think to a certain extent it is. But working from home, I've always said to them, isn't easy. It's not as easy as it sounds because of the loneliness part of it. I spent 8 to 12 hours in this little box room in my home office to then get up and maybe go to bed, or maybe talk to the wife if she's around and not got out to work. It's a lot harder now. I've got kids. Concentrating with the kids running around is, that's a whole new skill.
Yeah. You had to tune things out that can otherwise be very, very immediate distractions, and it's easy for them to be distracting, right? And they can't help it.
Yeah. And I think the last thing is a discipline, because a lot of people, I think it takes a certain level of discipline and maturity in your career to effectively work from home, because it's very easy for a long time to swing the lead, if that's a term that you're a fay with, or slack off is probably
right.
a
That's
better
more,
one.
yeah. Slack off is more the parlance over here, but no, I think that's absolutely right, and to a large effect, going back to my earlier point, having people co-located is a way of keeping people sort of honest, if you will, right? Keeping people, as otherwise, kind of like effectually working as they should be. And, I think arguably a lot of the things that people do in the workplace is very repetitive work, right? Even an engineer is going to do certain repetitive tasks. You're trying to solve a problem in the code. You're going to do a research task to try to solve that problem by kind of, let's say, Googling it, right? You're going to talk with peers about how they've solved a similar problem. You're going to do some research about how to properly structure, what it is that you're trying to accomplish in your code base. And that work necessarily requires a significant amount of focus, or necessarily requires a significant amount of attention to detail and a crazy amount of communication, right? Because you're talking with your team, because you're trying to implement something that isn't going to be, sort of a problem for them or down the line. And one of the most important things that we've observed in our business is that, you don't necessarily facilitate people learning something as effectively if they're remote, because people are already sort of naturally uncomfortable with asking questions. So we have, in our process, as a result of this disruption, just more independently had senior managers reach out to people one-on-one, ask those questions, and be much like a router, right? Taking a question or query, moving it down the line to the next person, and then returning back to that person an answer or solution to the question that they have. And so we've kind of transformed some of the management roles that we have to really be these facilitators of communication more than sort of direct management. And that's how we've kind of kept productivity at an all-time high.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've had issue with in the past, is that in the office, you can go over to a colleague and ask the question, and you can stand there until they give you an answer. But remotely, they can ignore your social media message, they can ignore your emails, they can ignore your Skype calls or Slack calls or whatever platform you use, maybe Microsoft Teams. And it can be quite disheartening, annoying that you don't get the answer to your question straight away. One other issue that I find is that because you are maybe in that mindset that everybody's watching, making sure that you are working, that you tend to work that little bit harder. And even as a consultant and a contractor, I find myself doing that as well. So I will log in slightly earlier. I will maybe sit back down at my desk after a lunch break a little bit earlier and work that a little bit later, just to make sure that I've got stuff done. So in the stand-ups the next day, I can say, this is what I definitely did. You also have the issue with if you're stuck on a problem, you find yourself banging your head against the table all day about it, and you wake up at like 2 a.m. and go, oh, that's the issue. Get up, fix the issue, and go back to bed because it's been on you. Now, I've only ever had that happen with remote roles. When I've been in the office, I've had similar issues where I've banged my head off the wall all day and not got anywhere, but I've never woken up in the middle of the night to fix it.
We had our engineers report daily on the items that they're trying to execute on, right? So we use ticketing systems, we use Jira, we use Redmine. To some degree, it depends on what our client wants. We use whatever tool is sort of available. They're all effectively going to produce the same result, right? It's a tool for measuring outcomes. But the other thing we do is we have the engineers report daily at the end of the day, like a quick, 5-6 line bullet point summary of here's what I'm working on, here's where I'm stuck, here's what I'm thinking. And that gets distributed both to the client, to the group. And so everybody can really, really concisely as possible see what it is that people are stuck on. And then we have a project manager. That project manager reviews those, and they do a video summary that then gets distributed to the group and to the client of here's, basically like taking that information, reconsolidating it, and then that project manager is able to circle back with that project manager. Hey, how can I help you with that particular problem? Or, hey, maybe we can solve this problem a different way. Let's talk with a different team member. And so that's one of the ways we've kind of helped, I guess, kind of circumnavigate some of those problems.
Sure. And it's definitely a different mindset for a business to have, if not everybody, a large percentage of the workforce working remote. And I think that as developers, as tech people, we maybe take it for granted a little bit that working remote is really easy for a business to do. But then you look at some of the logistics side of it. You've got staff there that they answer the phones, they do stuff physically on site. How do they work from home? I think it's a very narrow mindset we often take when we look at this problem. I think a lot of people's eyes will have been opened by the current situation as to what that really means for a business. Because I've often found myself in a position saying to businesses, well, why can't your staff work remote? Is it a case of trust? Is it a case of you're not set up from a technological point of view? Or is it just because you like to have people in the office? What is it?
I think it's, for a lot of the teams, we've had a lot of conversations around this recently. I think for a lot of teams, it's a combination. It's not one particular thing. It's typically a combination of problems, right? So, the way they communicated previously was all either in person or via email, and, email's not sufficient. Or, so what we do, one of the approaches we take is not to overwhelm our teams and our clients, but we provide a plethora of tools. Like we give multiple ways to communicate, because what we've observed is that people have a preferred method of communication. Some people prefer, using messaging, right? Using a Slack or one of these things. Other people prefer to get on a phone call, right? If something is too complex. Other people prefer to, just sort of send that email, have it be concise as possible, or send a recorded video, or jump on video chat or one of these things. And so we just say, hey, these are the available tools. We're going to have some pattern communication, but however you want to communicate, like just as long as you're communicating aggressively, we don't care.
Yeah. I think having that ability to adapt and change is something that the businesses are going to need to do going forward. And I think that what the world is currently seeing is it's unprecedented. We've not been through it before, but if it ever happens again, I think we need to be a little bit better prepared. And I think what we've actually seen and done so far, I think will help us to some degree. What do you sort of like see as being the outcome for businesses worldwide? Really, how is it going to affect them long term?
So one of the things that was like really kind of regularly reported after, let's say, starting in 2011, 2012, is that these analysts of these really large companies were observing that, hey, these companies they've really kind of leaned up. They've really streamlined operations. They've really sort of figured out a way to be much more productive. And I think what's going to happen is that all managers right now, in many respects, are going to be forced to look at their operations in a way that they've not been forced to either ever before look at this way, or consider sort of more redundancy, more security. What is my disaster recovery plan, and how does that function? And say, well, fundamentally, because of the internet, because of these changes that have occurred and are necessary, maybe it's okay for me to allow a certain degree of remote work and remote flexibility. It's not really efficient for people to all drive into work at 9 o'clock and all leave from work at 5 o'clock, right? If we were using the roadways at different times, it would be a much more efficient use of people's time. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have not a fundamental shift in how people structure their work time, but I think you're going to see a gradual shift towards how companies and teams allow their workers to operate. And I think you're still going to see, like large co-locations of people, in office buildings and these sorts of things. I don't think it's going to sort of fundamentally transform the value that can be created by being in front of people. But I do think you're going to see much more flexibility as it relates to facilitating remote work, as it relates to buying and structuring the work environment, tools for the work environment that allow for communication, even though people are not co-located.
Sure. In the UK, working remote it's a bit of a novelty, really, for a lot of businesses. It's a very new thing, and a lot of businesses before now, as I said earlier, weren't really geared up for it. Is it a similar situation over the pond in the States there, or is it more of a more common practice?
It's kind of geographically determined in some respects, right? So, there's, let's say, Silicon Valley, these areas, they really have these really large complexes that they want people to sort of all go to. Whereas I think in most other localities, outside of kind of East Coast, West Coast, there already is a greater degree of flexibility in terms of where people are, what they're doing, when they're in the office. At least that's what I've observed.
Sure. Yeah, I know quite a few devs over the pond, as I said, who work remote, and it seems to be a lot more commonplace over there, and maybe an expected aspect of the business. Whereas in the UK, it's very much seen as a novelty or under very special circumstances. You know, it's a treat for somebody to be able to work remote.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen businesses lose very good developers because they've had to move away due to maybe their spouse having to move for their business, or the company that they work for, or, you know, some family reason that they've had to move away, and the company's just cut ties with them and go, well, there's nothing we can do. You can't work remote. See you later.
Right. I think the businesses here will pay a premium in some instances to have that face-to-face interaction. But I think they also recognize, just like what you've talked about, that sometimes you're not going to be able to get that, right? And there should be a little bit of a price difference sometimes, depending on the person's performance or skill set. But B, rather than lose that person, let's just kind of allow for the flexibility and, just get the value we can get out of the person.
Yeah. You touched on something there that I've had heated discussions with some recruiters that they phoned me up and they said, "Oh, we've got this fantastic position and it's 100% remote, and because it's 100% remote, we want to ask if you'll do it for 50% of your normal day rate." No, it doesn't work like that. I'm still outputting the same work, if not a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, I never understand why two people doing the same job, one in the office and one remote, should get paid differently just because one doesn't commute into the office.
Right. And by and large, I think outside of these situations where businesses, want to pay that premium to have somebody in person, right? We find that really clients really care more about the productivity of the engineer, right? What is the output that they're giving me, for the exchange of my dollar for your labor? And if that output remains really high, then that's fine. Like, I won't care as much where you are outside of, in some cases where they do just kind of need that person there in person.
Yeah. And it's not really comparable on the whole to the current situation that we've got with remote working and what staff are and aren't doing. I think there are stresses and strains on businesses now that probably require paying that little bit less than what they normally would.
Right.
But as long as it's not used as a crux going forward for businesses to say, well, you've been doing it for 80% or 70% or whatever it is of your salary before this, so maybe you could do it for less going forward. Do you think that this is going to leave a scar across the world and industry is going to change, or is it going to go back to how it was working before? So back to the same old rules about remote working and the like.
I think you're going to have a number of people who are going to reconsider what it is that's important to them, because you're going to have folks who, have otherwise been forced to spend time with family members, and then other people who have been really overjoyed to spend extra time with family members. So you're going to have a fundamental shift in people's thinking as a result of this. It's of course, altered a number of people's lives. Some people are going to lose jobs. Some new jobs are going to be created. It's going to shift things. And so I think you're going to see a shuffling. I don't know that you're necessarily going to see a sort of reordering of the way business is conducted broadly. I think you're going to see a shuffling rather than a total reordering. And that shuffling is really kind of who is playing what role rather than where they're playing that role. Again, I do think there's going to be more flexibility towards remote work, but I don't necessarily know that the business community writ large is going to change how they operate, right? So my team right now is a little bit of a skeleton crew in terms of who is still getting together, and we're being very careful about that, still, maintaining certain structures of process. But fundamentally, we would prefer if people were in the same place, because it's just faster to sort of lean over a cubicle, so to speak, and share information with somebody.
Yeah. I can definitely speak to that. And I used to really enjoy working remote to a point, but then, as I mentioned, the kids are now running around the house and causing the distraction, and it's tough now. It's really tough just to keep that concentration to get on with stuff. I've got noise cancelling headphones, which most developers probably have in some way, shape, or form, and that helps to an extent. But I do like being in the office. I've always sort of seen myself as an extroverted introvert, if you like. I like my own company, but I do need that little bit of human interaction. And I think something's switched in me over the last couple of years. Maybe it's switching to becoming a contractor. So I've had to be more engaging with people, and having to walk into a new company and say, "Hi, I'm James. This is what I do. This is what I'm here to do." Maybe led me to need that real human interaction, because it's something that I've definitely been craving over the last few weeks. It's been quite tough. Sitting here and working on this. My other half works night shifts, so normally I finish work. We have our evening meal. I put the kids to bed. She goes to work, and then I do some more work, and then I go to bed, and then rinse and repeat.
Right.
So getting up and getting into the office is good, because you get to see people, you get to talk to them, and as well as getting the job done. So there's definitely something to that, I think.
So I think that leads to a question sort of we talked about pre-show, which is, like what are the things then that companies should do about their working practices, kind of given a disaster recovery situation or something like that. And I'm of the opinion it really just kind of goes back to, you create more opportunities for communication, for people to have interactions by putting out multiple tools for people to use, be it a Zoom meeting or Skype meetings or Slack or scheduled or forced plan meetings that are not necessarily really long. Maybe it's just 5 minutes, but it forces that interaction. People will raise kind of questions that they otherwise need, right? So we have stand-up meetings. We're doing a sprint methodology for a lot of the work that we do, and our stand-up meetings in some cases are only 5 minutes. It's, person 1, go. Person 2, go. Person 3, go. Any questions, go. But while they're sometimes only 5 minutes, they're exceptionally well balanced to allow people to voice an opinion or bring up something that they're otherwise stuck on that they may not have otherwise immediately just sort of brought up. Like, hey, team, I am stuck on this thing. Need some help, or I have an opinion about this. But facilitating that as a matter of process, and then also putting the tools out there to facilitate the communication. And maybe they're tools you haven't used before. Maybe people haven't used Slack or Rocket Chat or one of these things. You're going to get engagement that you otherwise didn't get when you push people remote.
Yeah. And I've always been, prior to what's happening now, one of the advocates for a very quick fire, fast. What did you do yesterday? What are you stuck on? What are you going to be doing today? Next person sort of stand-ups. Whereas what I've been doing lately has been a little less formal, bit of a laugh and a joke, and a bit of banter and back and forth between everybody, just to try and keep it a little bit more personable. I think the team that I currently work with, there's a lot of us that have worked remote for large periods of time during our career, so it's less novelty for us. But that human interaction is definitely a good thing, I think, in these remote situations. I've been in teams where it's always just been that very formal bang, bang, bang all the way through. I think you lose a little bit of the team in there. And I've always said that if you're not a team that can't have a laugh and joke and mess around together, as well as get the work done, are you really an effective team? I think it's something that gets overlooked by business, that you should get on a personal level with your teammates if you can.
Right. Absolutely.
So if companies currently aren't able to have their staff working remote, what are some of the things that they should be looking at doing, as well as setting up the ability for their staff to communicate effectively?
I think one of the things is actually take a gauge of how that individual, right, that individual team member prefers to communicate. You know, have a one-off conversation with them as a manager and say, hey, what is your preferred method of communication, right? You know, if you're not comfortable in a group setting to begin with, or a group setting over the phone is your preferred method of communication, then tell me how I can best communicate with you in this situation. What would you prefer? And I think if you take the time to do that with all your team members, really just a quick 5-minute chat, then you're ultimately going to have much better outcomes as it relates to the communication that you will have in a distant situation.
Sure. So if one of the listeners out there is currently working for one of these employers that hasn't taken any action to help them facilitate the business, to help protect their staff, is there anything that you could advise them to go and do?
Yeah, I would actually take the ideas of your constituents, right? Like get the feedback of your employees. You know, they probably do have thoughts around what it is that would be best to do during this time and in such a situation. And you can temper those thoughts, of course, against what is really ultimately best for the business, best for the clients, best for the employees. But taking that feedback, I think you'll be surprised to hear that you're going to get pretty high levels of engagement, and you're probably going to get some pretty good ideas. So that would be the first thing: is really kind of pull your employees, pull your clients, get their ideas, sort of pool them together, if you will, and then share those with the team, and then collectively, collaboratively, get everybody's feedback, get everybody on the same page.
Sure. So you're saying there is, don't take the problem to your boss, take the problem with the solution to your boss.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, it's something I've seen in the past where people have complained that the business has not been in a position to offer. And I know we keep going back to it, but remote working or anything like that. And I've worked for a lot of companies that don't even have a disaster recovery plan. So if things went south overnight, that they'd be stuffed, to put it nicely, come the next day. And even down to not committing code to remote repositories before you finish for the day. I think there's some basics there that businesses need to look at, not just shipping their staff off to work from other locations.
Right. There's definitely a process component that goes to that, right? And it probably is, for a lot of business, as I was saying sort of at the onset of our conversation, a need to realign processes around different sort of working dynamics, right? So the process change is going to be probably more important than the communication, because you really have to have the process before you have the pattern of communication, right? Here is what I expect to have at the end of the week. Here is how you can deliver that to me at sort of the end of the week, and how I'm going to be able to check your work. Getting your code commits in place. One of the things we do is actually we well before this, we have switched to trunk-based development so that we're pulling down the code, basically, or that engineer is pulling down from that master branch and then making a really quick commit out back to the master branch so that everybody's kind of working from that same master. And then, of course, we do have one person who really is kind of maintaining the code, making sure there's really not merge conflicts, these sorts of things. But switching to that process, it really doesn't matter if somebody has sort of an older version on their local that is otherwise not merged with the master, because we're making really small incremental changes, right? So there's engineering process changes which can very easily be done and are likely more beneficial for your team to undertake anyway, that would also help solve for some of those problems.
Yeah. And getting code to a point where it's always deployable and you haven't got any merge conflicts is always troublesome. I spent, I've worked with companies that have done the let's all work on master, let's all work on trunk. Some companies get away with it, other ones don't. I think it very much depends on the team and very much on the product and how you're working with the technology.
Sure. So if you've got, let me interrupt you. So if you've got a for example, something that's very, very complex feature, right? That's going to take several days of development. Really, in our view, it kind of becomes I just need to communicate about what I'm going to be touching, what components of the application that I'm going to be touching, as it relates to me making a change to my local, and how that's going to affect my other engineers. We're sitting and doing the work in that Scrum meeting to say, here's my burn down. Here's what I'm going to work on. I need this much time in this, set of components, this set of modules. Hey, it's going to affect team member 1 and 2. Just be cognizant of that, and we may have to coordinate offline to get that solved for this period of a week or 2 weeks or however long it's going to take to build that feature.
Yeah, and I think that's something that encompasses the whole topic, I think, of what we've talked about today, and that is being mindful of everybody and everything around you at all times during your development day. Is the business functioning okay? Are you functioning okay? Are the people you're working with, are they okay? Are you doing the best for yourself, but are you also doing the best for them? Are you making their job easier? Because the last thing you want to do is to start causing problems, especially with probably tempers and stress levels so high right now. You need to make sure you're being the best dev that you can be.
Right. Absolutely.
But unfortunately, I think we're just out of time for today. It's been interesting talking to you on this topic. I think there's a good few takeaways here for the listeners to maybe take back to their businesses or to feel a little bit better about where they currently are, what they're currently doing. So that just sort of leaves me with to say thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Well, thanks for having me, James. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, not a problem. And thank you to everybody out there for listening. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Ian Reynolds talking about software and the apocalypse. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.